Let's begin by setting up the Query Client Provider, which will allow us to use React Query throughout our NextJS application. First, we import Query Client and Query Client Provider from the React Query library. We then instantiate a new Query Client object, which is responsible for creating the cache and managing the queries. In the MyApp component, which is the root component of a NextJS app, we wrap the entire application inside the Query Client Provider and pass the Query Client instance we created as a prop. This will make React Query functionalities available to all our components. Next, we'll write our data fetching function, which will be used by the useQuery hook. We import useQuery from React Query and then define the async function fetchUserData that takes a user ID parameter. Within this function, we perform a fetch request to our API endpoint. Upon receiving a response, we check if it's satisfactory. If not, we throw an error. Otherwise, we parse the JSON from the response and return it. This function encapsulates the asynchronous logic needed for fetching the user data. In the user profile component, we destructure the user ID prop. We then call the useQuery hook and pass in a query key, which is an array that includes a string user and the user ID. The query key uniquely identifies the query in the React Query cache. The second argument to useQuery is the fetchUserData function, which will be invoked by React Query to fetch the data. The useQuery hook returns an object with properties like data, is loading, and error, which we'll use to handle the UI states. We first check if the query is in a loading state using the isLoading boolean. If true, we render a loading message on the screen. This provides the users with immediate feedback that the data is being fetched. Next, we handle any potential errors that may occur during the data fetching process. If the error object is not null, which means an error has occurred, we render the error message to the users, allowing them to understand that something went wrong. Finally, if the data fetching is successful and there are no errors or loading states, we render the user profile. We access the user's name and email from the data object returned by useQuery and display them within an H1 and P tag respectively. This completes the user profile component, showcasing how to handle fetching, loading, and error states with ease using React Query.